Welcome to Unmasking Government Schools with Sheri Few, USPIE's weekly podcast that empowers parents to reclaim their children's education from government bureaucrats and social engineers. In each episode, Sheri delivers the latest news from the front lines of the fight for the minds of the next generation, equipping you with the tools and resources needed to join the cause.
Welcome to the very first episode of Unmasking Government Schools with Sheri Few. I am your host, Sheri Few, and I'm glad you found your way to this podcast. Unmasking Government Schools pulls back the curtain on the challenges facing government education today, helping you better understand issues like declining academic achievement, nefarious pedagogies originating and incentivized from the federal government, and the growing disconnect between schools and the communities they serve. By advocating for a return to parental and local control, this podcast will empower parents, policymakers, and freedom-loving Americans to reshape the future of education and the future of our children and grandchildren. Through unique interviews and the latest, most consequential education news, Unmasking Government Schools will offer you a fresh perspective on how you and I can ensure children receive an excellent education and make parental and local control of education a reality. If you're a parent, or like me, a grandparent of school-age children, or if you love this country God has blessed us with and want to ensure that future generations enjoy the freedoms and rights that our forefathers intended for us to have, we welcome you to become a regular listener of Unmasking Government Schools, a podcast designed to encourage and equip you to not only resist but have victory over the forces that have been eroding those rights and those freedoms for far too long. I invite you to stand with a growing army of Americans who have risen to the public square to shout, "Not on our watch." This podcast will be broadcast weekly, and we're so glad you found us. Make sure you like the podcast and that you visit our website, USPIE, that's USPIE.org, to join the movement.
Today's episode is brought to you by U.S. parents involved in education. USPIE's mission is to empower parents and local communities to break free from federal and national influences, thereby reclaiming parental authority over their children's education. For more insights from U.S. parents involved in education, connect with us at USPIE on X and Facebook. To join the movement, visit uspie.org.
Well, we have a great inaugural show for you today. I have a very special guest. She's a movie star as featured in our documentary film, Truth and Lies in American Education, which we will be discussing today. She's also on staff here at U.S. Parents Involved in Education, but more importantly, she's the wife of my son and mother to my grandchildren. My daughter-in-law, April Few, is with me today, and together we're going to talk about the origins of USPIE, including my own journey into education policy and advocacy, April's story of discovery as told in part in the film, and what it was like to be the protagonist of Truth and Lies. Thank you for doing this with me, April, and welcome to Unmasking Government Schools.
Thank you, Sheri. I'm so glad to be a part of this, especially the first episode. I'm very excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you could join us. So before we start our conversation with April, I wanted to let you know about something we do here at USPIE. We call it the Millstone of the Month Award. The Millstone of the Month Award is given each month to an individual, group, or organization that has committed the most egregious acts against children, especially as it pertains to education. The Millstone of the Month Award serves to raise awareness of how federal funding and control undermine parental choice and contribute to the spread of wokeness and other harmful ideologies in America's classrooms. And by the way, this is the award you never want to receive. Who would have ever thought serious adults would be unable to answer, "What is a woman?" Title IX, written to protect girls, has morphed into a tool to shield boys pretending to be girls, putting girls at a disadvantage in sports and at risk in locker rooms. After the sexual revolution of the 60s, young women were taught to discard motherhood in favor of a career. Act more like men, they were told. Today, they're encouraged to become men through drugs and irreversible surgeries. In 2018, Dr. Lisa Littman conducted a study on the rise of rapid-onset gender dysphoria, mostly among females, a complex change of cultural norms, and warned that caution is warranted. Caution? U.S. Parents Involved Education believes it's time to act to save our girls. Tune in next week for more insights from U.S. Parents Involved in Education and connect with us at USPIE on X and Facebook. To join the movement, visit uspie.org. Welcome back to Unmasking Government Schools with Sheri Few. I am your host, Sheri Few, and I'm here with USPIE's Executive Assistant and the protagonist of USPIE's documentary film, Truth and Lies in American Education, my own daughter-in-law, April Few. Welcome, April.
Thanks for having me. I had a little idea, if you're okay with this, Sheri. Would you mind sharing with the audience your story first about how you got started and how you founded USPIE, maybe before we get into my journey?
When my children were young, including your husband, and they were in government schools, I began to see things in the curriculum that really concerned me. In particular, there was a very insidious sex education program that was being adopted by our State Board of Education. So I gathered parents who I knew in my community and around the state, and we fought those standards. And we were effective in pointing it more toward an abstinence until marriage education. So from that, we became South Carolina Parents Involved in Education. We were involved with many issues in our state. In 2010, we led the fight against the Common Core standards, and we grew and had a very well-organized grassroots effort. And we had gotten our legislature to propose legislation that would end Common Core in our state. That was a 2-year effort. And we were very discouraged when we learned that at the last minute they amended our legislation and we ended up with Common Core just rebranded under a different name. So after that discouragement, I was talking with colleagues of mine from around the country who had similar experiences. They had fought Common Core in their states, only for it to end the same way it did in our state, Common Core rebranded. So we were all very frustrated, and we decided that we would collaborate. And that's when we became the national organization, United States Parents Involved in Education. So we adopted as our mission ending the U.S. Department of Education and all federal education mandates. And the reason we chose that for our mission was because we understood that this is where the majority of the nefarious pedagogies originate. They start from the federal government, incentivized with federal dollars, just like the Common Core standards were done. So that's how USPIE was founded.
I just love hearing your story about how you got started. It's very inspiring, especially now that I'm a part of United States Parents Involved in Education. I always love hearing about what you did, 15 years ago. It's pretty awesome.
So now let's talk a little bit about your journey. So your journey into the education policy world started when you married my son and were confronted with the question of how to educate your own children, my grandchildren. Before you tell us about that, let's play a short clip from our documentary, Truth and Lies in American Education, and it touches on that just a bit.
Sheri found out about some really bad comprehensive sexuality education standards that the school wanted to implement. So she went up to the school. She was getting a lot of pushback, so she decided to get involved with education policy. And ever since then, she has become very well known.
April is the perfect daughter-in-law, wonderful wife, great mother. She and I are good friends.
I was pretty liberal. I was pretty progressive. I believed in the whole climate change agenda. I thought that trans women were real women. I mean, I was a poster child for the left.
So I gave her some required reading, and she read several books, and she talks about how she didn't even believe what she was reading at first. So it was a journey for April, and has just evolved into the face of our organization.
Because what is happening and what is being taught in the public schools are attitudes, behaviors, a worldview, and a mindset that goes against what many parents believe. After learning everything that I learned, I kind of made it my mission to tell other parents and make sure that they were aware of what's happening and what's being taught in the classroom across America.
Wow. It's been a while since I've seen that clip, and I honestly can't believe that the journey that I have been on to get where I am today. You know, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, even, I was pretty liberal minded. When I met your son, um, I was pretty much, a poster child for the left. I'm sure you remember meeting me. I don't know if you remember the conversation we had at your dining room table, though, about how I couldn't believe what was in the Bible because of science. All of the science that I had learned defied everything that I had learned growing up in church as a child. Um, when I was, 20 years old, I even shaved my head. I was very rebellious, walked away from my faith, and really embraced everything that the liberal left promotes. So I met your son, and obviously I had no idea really that I did have no idea that you were involved politically whatsoever. So that was kind of a shock. And we we got pregnant, we got married, and you gave me some work. You were gracious enough to give me some work to do for United States Parents Involved in Education. And I didn't really think much of it. You gave me some books to read on the history of education policy, and I read them. A lot of it went over my head at the time, and what I did understand, I didn't believe. I had to go look up each individual issue and pretty much everything that was in that book. It was Crimes of the Educators by Sam Blumenfeld and Alex Newman, and The Long War and Common Core by Donna Hearn. And I literally, on every page, had to go and look it up because it was unbelievable what was happening. Before I had children, I really didn't think much at all about education because I didn't have kids. I didn't think it applied to me. And I, was more left-leaning. I wasn't conservative at all. So started working for USPIE, read those books, and even after a couple of years working for USPIE, I didn't think that we were going to homeschool. um, I believe that God started to work on me a few years after working for USPIE, because slowly, and it took a while, slowly I started to get it and I started to understand. And the more research I did, the more my mind was blown, and the more I began to accept that, okay, this is the reality of what is happening and what has happened in the classroom. And I've got to make a decision now about how I want to educate my child, your grandchildren. My children now, I have two children, but at the time I only had one. And we decided, with your encouragement, because like I said, for a while, I remember sitting in your office and you saying you need to homeschool. And I was thinking, okay, yeah, that's not going to happen. There's no way. I don't have a college degree, much less an formal educational training or any degree of the sort. So I just thought that was out of the question. That was impossible. How could I educate children without some sort of training? And fast forward till now, when we've been homeschooling now for several years, and it's just the best thing that has ever happened to us. And now, like USPIE says, I don't recommend anybody put their kid in government school because, they're not learning how to read and write, and they're being taught all this stuff that's just lies. So, and then working on the film Truth and Lies in American Education, I got to interview a lot of experts on different issues that are happening with education, the pornography in schools, critical race theory, workforce development, and dumbing down the standards. That was an eye-opener as well because, I've read a lot, worked with USPIE a lot, but actually getting to interview experts in these certain fields was quite the honor, and nothing to be taken lightly.
Well, thank you, April. I love your passion. I love how you are easily moved to emotion. It just shows how big a heart you have and how passionate you are about your children, your family, and the work that we do here at USPIE. So thank you for sharing that, and never, ever feel bad about shedding a tear. I love that about you. So we're going to have the film's director here in an upcoming episode to discuss the film in more detail. So you were telling us a little bit about your experience as being the protagonist in the film. Is there anything you want to add to that?
Yeah, all of the interviews that we did were pretty amazing. It was such an honor to be able to talk one-on-one with these experts. But one of the interviews that stuck out the most to me was with Donna Hearn. And I mentioned her earlier as the author of The Long War in Common Core. And Donna Hearn worked under the Reagan administration in the Department of Education. And she was tasked with finding out what they were doing. And so she and a colleague really dove in and started to investigate. And they came across massive amounts of data collection. And I really advise you to watch the film because I'm butchering her whole interview. But she does an amazing job of explaining how she was just shocked. She and her colleague could not believe the amount of data collection that was happening. And that was, decades and decades ago. So you can imagine what is happening now. But her interview was so great. And just having the opportunity as someone, who I'm nobody great, nobody famous, nobody very important, but I had the opportunity to help expose what is happening in government schools. So I thought that was pretty awesome.
Let me remind you that God has a way of always using the things that the world thinks is foolish to confound the wise. So when you say you're not anyone important, well, that's exactly the kind of person God likes to use, because then people see that it's God working through them. So I'm so glad that you had the opportunity. I'm so glad you were willing to be the star in our film, because I certainly didn't want to do that work. And you did an amazing job with the film. I've had so many compliments on it. So you had some opportunities to travel and meet, like you said, some really high-profile people, and work with our wonderful producer and his crew. You got to meet people like Sam Sorbo, who was a great mentor for you in homeschooling. So what was that like? What was the experience like, feeling like a star?
Well, certainly nothing like I felt before. Interestingly enough, I wanted to be an actress back when I was so lost. And I even moved up to near New York City because I wanted to be on SNL. I wanted to be in front of the camera. So God certainly does have a sense of humor and a way of showing that, because I was in front of the camera, but not in any way that I ever thought that I would be. But it was incredible. I wish I could do it again. I would love to do it again, really.
Well, maybe we'll do that. Maybe we'll do another film sometime in the future. I've got a few ideas. We'll see where the Lord takes that. So we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, I want to talk about USPIE's mission with you, because I'm a grandmother, but you actually have school-age children. And I want to know how USPIE's mission resonates with your generation and demographic. Don't go away. We'll be right back after this. U.S. Parents Involved in Education is a nonprofit nationwide coalition dedicated to restoring education to its rightful local roots. USPIE's mission is to empower parents and local communities, enabling them to break free from federal and national influences, thereby reclaiming parental authority over their children's education. We firmly believe that parental rights are inherent God-given rights. Children belong to their families, not the state, and local communities are best equipped to support parents in raising their children. The vision of USPIE is to cultivate a culture where parents, entrusted with the authority to choose how their children learn, stand as the undisputed primary educators. In this culture, local schools operate in tandem with families, and education is free from burdensome federal mandates. Join us next week for further insights into U.S. Parents Involved in Education, including our game-changing blueprint to establish state control of education. For more information, visit uspie.org or connect with us at USPIE on Facebook and Twitter. Welcome back to Unmasking Government Schools with Sheri Few. I am your host, Sheri Few. I'm here with my daughter-in-law, April Few, and we're discussing how USPIE's mission resonates with her generation. So, April, you were going to talk to us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I talked to a lot of parents of school-aged children, and a lot of parents have never even considered the idea of closing the Federal Department of Education. A lot of them look and they'll say, huh, and they really have to think about that for a minute. It's never even crossed their mind that we could do that as a possibility. Um, Once I begin to talk about USPIE's blueprint to close the Department of Education and really get into the details of what's laid out in that blueprint, parents begin to listen. Most agree that what is happening is, not okay. Some parents have their head in the sand. Some use the excuse of, our children are the salt and the light, or, other excuses. And a lot of parents, though, they do see what's going on, but they feel trapped. They have to work. Both parents work. They have to have, some sort of childcare or somewhere to send their children for school. And that's usually what I get a lot of, which is mentioned in the film, too.
Well, you talk about excuses some of them make, and it's really unacceptable because if they love their children, they have to protect their children. So you and I both know because we have been knee deep in all of this, but we are trying to sound the alarm so parents understand that the government schools are toxic and they will harm their children. I mean, if you think about it, April, what are some of those parents going to say when their child comes home one day and says, Mommy, my teacher says I can be a boy and not a girl? I mean, what are they going to say then? And at that point, the teacher's already created a wedge between the parent and the child because the child says, well, Mommy, my teacher says I can do that if I want to. And if you don't let me, then they're going to find me a new home. What's the parent going to say then? So that's how toxic the schools have become. And of course, it's not just the transgender toxicity of the schools. It's the critical race theories, teaching children to hate themselves and one another and this country. We know that children are taught to hate this country. And it's so sad. And that's why, that we tell people, even if you don't have kids in government schools, this is an issue that should concern you. If you're a freedom-loving American, you should be very concerned about the future of this country because of these intentional Marxist agendas that are being indoctrinated into children against our country and against one another with an intentional agenda to change our form of government. So it's not just about protecting children, right, April? It's about protecting our country's freedom.
Right. And if I may just mention that I was talking to a parent a few weeks ago at one of our extracurriculars, and she's actually a teacher in a local elementary school here. And she was telling me she was very distraught. And I said, what's wrong? And she explained to me that her second grader that day, who's a girl, was in line, just going to the cafeteria or somewhere. I'm not sure where they were headed, but the boy in front of her turned around and punched her square in the face for no reason at all. And I said, and you didn't take her home immediately? So parents know, she knows that was wrong, but we have to make the hard decisions and the sacrifice to say, okay, enough is enough. Take your kids out and protect them. Yes, absolutely.
Right. So that's the first line of defense for parents is to get their kids out. But then, of course, we don't leave the other kids behind because if we allow all children to be indoctrinated the way they have been and continue to be, again, we're going to lose our very freedom in this country. So we encourage parents to make the sacrifices that are necessary. You and my son make sacrifices. by you not being employed and staying home and homeschooling the children. But as you said earlier, and that's what evoked your emotion, is that it's such a blessing to be able to do that. And I've heard you say what a rewarding experience it is. But even if parents don't homeschool, which is really a great option, there are good private and Christian schools that are good alternatives. So we encourage parents to do what they can to protect their children and get them out of the government schools. So April, I just thank you so much for joining me today on our first episode of Unmasking Government Schools with Sheri Few. I actually am hopeful that you are going to work alongside of me and be a co-host often and entertain the ideas of some of our experts that we're going to have on the show. Before we wrap it up, April, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yes. Just speaking to parents, it's never too late to make a decision to change the trajectory of your child's education, whether it be pulling them out of public school, putting them in private school or Christian school, or I always recommend homeschooling because whether you think you can or not, you can. I thought that I couldn't, but now I would never give that responsibility to anybody else. But I just want to give hope to parents because you can always make a change. It's never too late. And that's probably what I would end with.
Very good. And I might add, too, that I know you and I both are encouraged to see so many parents who are waking up and understanding what's happening in the government schools. And that's part of why you and I work so hard at USPIE, is to inform people and educate them. That's why we produced the film Truth and Lies in American Education. But I think that was the silver lining of COVID, was that parents were at home with their kids and they were seeing what their children were learning. And that's when we started to see them all over social media, speaking out at school boards and being outraged and running for school board. So, with all the years that I've been involved with education policy, this is an exciting time for me because we really see the grassroots army of parents rising up across the nation and saying, enough is enough. You can't have my children, and I won't let you do this anymore. So that's how we can be encouraged, and I think that's probably a good way to end this first episode, is to be reminded that this is an exciting time because parents are in the fight, and they're not going to let this continue to happen to America's children. So join me again next week for another episode of Unmasking Government Schools with Sheri Few. See you then.
U.S. Parents Involved in Education is a nonprofit coalition dedicated to restoring local control of education and parental authority. By empowering parents to reclaim responsibility for their children's learning and encouraging states to move away from federal influence, USPIE seeks to create a culture where parents are the primary decision makers in education and schools support families without the burden of federal mandates. If you want to start a state or regional USPIE chapter in your area, please visit uspie.org and complete the brief questionnaire in the chapters section.